I'm Zephyr Hawthorne, storm chaser turned survivor. 72 hours ago, I was tracking a bizarre weather system. Now, I'm running from the undead. My meteorology skills are the only thing keeping me alive in this zombie hellscape. Every decision could mean life or death. This is how I survived the first 3 days of the apocalypse. Before we start the video, let us know what country you are tuning in from in the comment section below. Perhaps we will make a story there. Let's begin. I've been a storm chaser for over a decade now, and I thought I'd seen it all. Tornadoes that could lift houses, hurricanes that reshaped coastlines, even freak hailstorms that pummeled entire towns. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what happened 3 days ago. My name is Zephyr Hawthorne, and I'm a meteorologist by training. Most people know me as Storm, a nickname I picked up after predicting a Category 5 hurricane that nobody else saw coming. I've always had a knack for reading the skies, for feeling the shifts in the air that signal something big is on its way. It saved my life more times than I can count. But this time it wasn't enough. It all started about a week before the outbreak. I was tracking a strange weather pattern that didn't make any sense. Low pressure systems were forming and dissipating at rates I'd never seen before. The jet stream was behaving erratically, and there were reports of bizarre aurora-like phenomena in areas where they shouldn't occur. I spent nights poring over data, trying to make sense of it all. I remember calling my colleague, Dr. Eliza Chen at the National Weather Service. "Eliza," I said, "something's not right. These patterns, they're unprecedented. We need to issue a warning." But Eliza just laughed it off. "Storm, you're being paranoid. It's just a series of anomalies, nothing to worry about." I couldn't shake the feeling, though. The day before everything went to hell, I was out in my truck, chasing what I thought was going to be a supercell thunderstorm. The readings were off the charts, barometric pressure dropping like a stone, wind speeds fluctuating wildly. But when I got to where the storm should have been, there was nothing. Just an eerie calm and a sky that looked wrong. The clouds had a sickly green tinge, and there was a smell in the air like ozone and something else I couldn't quite place. I set up my equipment anyway, hoping to capture some data that might explain what was going on. As I was adjusting my anemometer, I noticed something strange. A group of deer burst out of the nearby woods, running as if their lives depended on it. Now, animals sensing an oncoming storm isn't unusual, but this was different. They looked terrified, and some of them were frothing at the mouth. I radioed back to base. "Hey Tom, you seeing any unusual animal activity on your end?" Tom's voice crackled back, tinged with confusion. "Now that you mention it, yeah. We've been getting reports of aggressive behavior in domestic animals, pets attacking owners, that sort of thing. Probably just a full moon or something." But I knew it wasn't just a full moon. Something was very, very wrong. I packed up my gear and headed back to the city. On the drive, I kept the radio on, flipping between stations. Most of it was the usual: pop music, talk shows, traffic reports. But then I caught a snippet of a news bulletin. Reports of a highly contagious virus spreading in major cities. Health officials advise staying indoors and avoiding contact with anyone showing symptoms of aggression or disorientation. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. This had to be connected to the weather patterns. It had to be. I barely slept that night. I kept checking my equipment, monitoring the atmospheric readings. They were getting worse. The pressure was dropping to levels I'd never seen before, and the wind patterns were chaotic. I tried calling Eliza again, but this time there was no answer. When morning came, I knew that today was the day everything would change. I woke up to the sound of sirens, lots of them. I turned on the TV, and every channel was showing the same thing: chaos. The newscasters were trying to maintain calm, but you could see the fear in their eyes. Isolated incidents of extreme violence have been reported across the city. Authorities are advising residents to stay in their homes and lock all doors and windows. I grabbed my go bag, always packed, always ready. Years of chasing storms teaches you to be prepared for anything, or so I thought. As I stepped outside, the air felt wrong, heavy like before a big storm, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. The street was eerily quiet, save for the distant wail of sirens and what sounded like screaming. I got in my truck and started driving. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just knew I needed to assess the situation. As a storm chaser, my instinct is always to go towards the danger. In hindsight, maybe that wasn't the smartest move. I hadn't gone more than a few blocks when I saw my first infected. It was Mrs. Carlson from down the street. She was always so nice, always baking cookies for the neighborhood kids. But now she was different. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her movements were jerky, unnatural. And her eyes, God, her eyes were just empty. She was attacking Mr. Gonzalez, our local mailman. I watched in horror as she sank her teeth into his arm. He screamed, a sound I'll never forget. I should have driven away. I should have left them, but I couldn't. I honked my horn, trying to distract Mrs. Carlson. It worked, but now her attention was on me. She started shambling towards my truck, faster than I expected. I threw the truck into reverse, my heart pounding. As I backed up, I saw Mr. Gonzalez start to twitch, his body convulsing. The transformation was happening right before my eyes. I sped away, my mind racing. This was it. This was what all those strange weather patterns had been leading up to. Somehow, the atmospheric changes had triggered this zombie apocalypse. It sounded crazy, even in my own head, but I knew it was true. I needed to get to higher ground, to get a better view of the situation. I headed for the old weather station on the outskirts of town. It was on top of a hill with a good vantage point of the city. As I drove, I saw more and more signs of the outbreak. Cars abandoned in the middle of the road, some with doors left open as if the occupants had fled in a hurry. Windows smashed in storefronts and people running, screaming, fighting. I passed by a gas station and saw something that made me slam on the brakes. A group of people were huddled inside the convenience store, while outside, a horde of infected were trying to break in. The glass was starting to crack. I had to make a choice. Keep driving and save myself, or try to help those people. I thought about Mrs. Carlson, about how quickly the infection had spread. Those people in the store probably didn't stand a chance. But then I saw a little girl among them. Couldn't have been more than 8 years old. She was clutching a stuffed animal, her eyes wide with terror, and I knew I couldn't leave them. I revved the engine and drove straight at the infected, honking my horn. They turned towards the noise, giving the people in the store a chance to escape out the back. I saw them run towards a minivan parked behind the building. The infected started coming for my truck. I put it in reverse, but one of them managed to grab onto the door handle. Its face was pressed against the window, mouth open in a silent snarl. I could see the bloodshot eyes, the veins standing out against the pale skin. I hit the gas hard. The infected lost its grip and fell away. In my rearview mirror, I saw the minivan speeding off in the opposite direction. At least I'd managed to save some people. But as I continued towards the weather station, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The real storm was yet to come. The drive to the weather station was like navigating through a war zone. The streets were littered with abandoned vehicles, some still idling, others crumpled from collisions. I had to swerve around debris and bodies. I tried not to look too closely at those. As I climbed the winding road up to the station, I got my first clear view of the city below. It was burning. Plumes of smoke rose from various points, and I could hear the distant pop of what I hoped were just transformers blowing and not gunfire. The weather station itself was a squat, concrete building crowned with a forest of antennas and satellite dishes. It had been my second home for years, a place of safety and certainty in the face of nature's fury. Now, as I pulled up to it, I hoped it would serve as a fortress against this new, unnatural threat. I approached the entrance cautiously, my pulse quickening as I noticed the door was ajar. Had the infected already made it up here? I grabbed a heavy flashlight from my truck. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. "Hello?" I called out as I entered, my voice echoing in the empty corridor. "Anyone here?" No response. I made my way through the familiar hallways, checking each room. The place seemed deserted, but there were signs of a hasty evacuation. Half empty. Coffee cups, computers left on, a jacket thrown over a chair. I reached the main monitoring room and felt a surge of relief. All the equipment was still running, screens displaying real-time data from weather stations across the country. I locked the door behind me and sank into the chair in front of the main console. For a moment, I just sat there, trying to process everything that had happened. The infected people, the chaos in the streets, the fires spreading through the city. It all felt like a nightmare, but the ache in my muscles and the lingering smell of smoke. I shook myself out of my daze. I needed to figure out what was going on, and this was the best place to do it. I started pulling up satellite imagery, weather maps, anything that might give me a clue about the connection between the strange atmospheric phenomena and the outbreak. As I worked, I kept an ear on the emergency radio channels. The chatter was constant and frantic, reports of attacks, requests for backup, cries for help. But as the hours wore on, the voices became fewer and farther between. It was nearing midnight when I finally started to see a pattern in the data. The outbreak seemed to be following the same erratic path as the weather anomalies I'd been tracking. Wherever the strange atmospheric conditions appeared, reports of infected followed within hours. But why? How could changes in the weather trigger something like this? I was missing a piece of the puzzle, something that would tie it all together. As I pondered this, a movement on one of the security camera feeds caught my eye. Someone, or something, was outside the station. I zoomed in, my heart racing. It was a person stumbling towards the building. Their movements were jerky, uncoordinated, infected. I watched as they reached the door, pawing at it with clumsy hands. The heavy steel held, but I knew it was only a matter of time before more came. I wasn't safe here. I needed to move to find somewhere more secure, but where? And how could I use what I'd learned to survive in this new, horrifying world? As I gathered my things and prepared to leave the relative safety of the weather station, I realized that my journey was far from over. In fact, It was just beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, surviving in a world overrun by the infected, and maybe, just maybe, finding a way to stop this apocalypse before it was too late. I knew I couldn't stay at the weather station much longer. The infected person outside was just the first. More would come, drawn by the lights or the faint hum of the equipment. I had to move, find somewhere safer, but I also needed to gather as much information as I could. I quickly downloaded all the data I'd collected onto a portable hard drive. It might be crucial later. Then I gathered what supplies I could find. Some bottled water, a few energy bars from someone's desk drawer, a first aid kit from the wall. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. As I prepared to leave, I took one last look at the monitors. The weather patterns were still chaotic, with strange storm systems forming and dissipating at an alarming rate. I had a sinking feeling that things were only going to get worse. I made my way back to my truck, moving as quietly as I could. The infected person was still there, clawing at the door. I managed to slip past unnoticed and got into the driver's seat. The key turned, the engine roared to life, and I was off, leaving the weather station and its lone, undead occupant behind. As I drove back down the hill, I tried to formulate a plan. I needed to find other survivors, people who might have more information about what was happening. The local emergency broadcast system crackled to life on my radio, interrupting my thoughts. This is an emergency alert. The city is under quarantine. All residents are advised to stay in their homes. Do not attempt to leave the city. Military checkpoints have been established at all major exits. If you are experiencing symptoms of aggression, disorientation, or fever, do not seek medical attention. Isolate yourself immediately. The message repeated, its robotic tone a stark contrast to the chaos I could see unfolding around me. The streets were even worse than before. Cars were abandoned everywhere, some still idling, others crashed into buildings or each other. And there were more infected now, wandering aimlessly, or chasing the few people still brave or desperate. Enough to be outside. I knew I couldn't stay in the city, quarantine or not. I had to get out, find somewhere less populated where I could regroup and figure out my next move. But first I needed supplies. I remembered a small convenience store near my apartment. It was a long shot, but maybe it hadn't been completely looted yet. I turned the truck in that direction, keeping a wary eye out for any infected that might decide my vehicle looked like an appealing target. As I neared my neighborhood, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A school bus was stopped in the middle of the road, its front end crumpled against a telephone pole. The doors were open, and I could see movement inside. I slowed down, torn between the urge to help and the need for self-preservation. Then I saw a small hand press against one of the windows, a child, still alive. I couldn't just drive by. I pulled over and grabbed my flashlight. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was all I had. As I approached the bus, I could hear sobbing coming from inside. "Hello?" I called out, trying. "Is anyone hurt in there?" A small face appeared in the window. A boy no more than 10 years old. "Please help us," he whispered. The driver, he turned into one of them. I climbed into the bus, my heart pounding. There were about a dozen children huddled in the back, as far away as they could get from the front where I could see the driver slumped over the wheel. "It's okay," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "We're going to get you out of here, but we have to be very quiet, okay?" The children nodded, their eyes wide with fear. I led them off the bus one by one, constantly checking to make sure the driver or any other infected weren't nearby. Once they were all off, I faced a new dilemma. I couldn't just leave them, but my truck didn't have nearly enough room for all of them. That's when I noticed a minivan parked nearby, its keys still in the ignition. It was a stroke of luck I desperately needed. "Okay, kids," I said, "we're going to take a little trip. Everyone into the van. Quickly now," as I helped the last child. Into the van, I heard a groan from the bus. The driver was starting to move. We had to leave now. I jumped into the driver's seat and started the engine. In my rearview mirror, I saw the bus driver emerge, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. His skin had taken on that sickly grayish pallor I was starting to recognize all too well. I floored it, the van's tires squealing as we took off down the street. The infected driver lunged after us, but we were already out of reach. I breathed, a sigh of relief, but I knew we weren't out of danger yet. "Is everyone okay?" I asked, glancing in the rearview mirror at my young passengers. They nodded, still too scared to speak much. "Good," I said. "I'm Zephyr. I'm going to try to get you somewhere safe, okay? But I need you all to be very brave and very quiet. Can you do that for me?" More nods. These kids were handling the situation better than many adults would, I thought. I drove carefully through the streets, avoiding the worst of the chaos. My mind was racing, trying to figure out where to take these children. The quarantine meant we couldn't leave the city, at least not easily. We needed a defensible position, somewhere with supplies where we could hole up for a while. Then it hit me. The mall. It was a huge building with plenty of stores full of food and other supplies. It had limited entry points that could be barricaded, and the roof would give us a good vantage point to see what was happening in the city. "All right, kids," I said. "We're going to the mall. It's not far, and I think we'll be safe there for a while." As we drove, I tried to piece together what I knew. The outbreak had spread incredibly fast, following the pattern of the weather anomalies I'd been tracking. But how and why? There had to be a connection, but I was missing something. We were about halfway to the mall when when we hit a snag. The road ahead was blocked by a pileup of cars, and beyond that, I could see a group of infected milling about. I cursed under my breath, then immediately felt bad for doing so in front of the kids. Okay, change of plans, I said, trying to sound confident. We're going to have to go around. Everyone stay calm. I turned down a side street, hoping to find a clear path to the mall, but every route seemed to be blocked or crawling with infected. We were being herded, I realized, forced in a specific direction by the chaos around us. That's when I saw it. The hospital looming ahead. Of course, in any other disaster, the hospital would be the place to go. But in this situation, it was probably the most dangerous place in the city. I was about to turn around when I heard a small voice from the back of the van. "My mom works there," one of the girls said. "She's a nurse. Maybe she's still okay?" I felt a pang in my chest. I knew the chances of her mother still being alive and uninfected were slim, but how could I dash this child's hope? "We'll check it out," I said, making a decision I hoped I wouldn't regret. "But we have to be very careful, okay?" As we approached the hospital, the scene became even more chaotic. Ambulances were overturned in the parking lot, and I could see figures moving erratically near the emergency room entrance. I parked the van a safe distance away and turned to face the children. "I need you all to stay here and keep the doors locked," I said. "I'm going to go check if it's safe. If I'm not back in 15 minutes, or if you see a lot of those sick people coming this way, I want you to drive away." "Can anyone here drive?" A boy in the back, who looked to be about 14, raised his hand tentatively. "I've driven my dad's tractor," he said. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. I quickly showed him the basics: gas, brake, steering. "Remember, only if it's an emergency," I said. "Otherwise, wait for me." With a deep breath, I got out of the van and locked it behind me. Place of healing, the hospital potentially a death trap, but I had to check. For the sake of that little girl and her hope, I had to check. As I approached the entrance, I could hear screams and crashes coming from inside. This was a bad idea. Every instinct told me to turn back, but I pressed on, pushing through the doors into the chaos beyond. The scene inside was worse than I could have imagined. The reception area was a war zone. Overturned gurneys, smashed equipment, and worst of all, bodies. Some were clearly dead, others were in the process of turning. I moved cautiously, my flashlight gripped tightly in my hand. "Hello?" I called out, keeping my voice low. "Any staff still here? We have children who need help." For a moment, there was silence. Then I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, shuffling footsteps coming from multiple directions. I'd made a terrible mistake. My call had attracted the infected. I turned to run, but found my path blocked by a figure in blood-stained scrubs. Its eyes were milky white, its mouth open in a silent snarl. I swung my flashlight, connecting with its head. It went down, but I could hear more coming. I ran, dodging, grasping hands and snapping teeth. I burst out of the emergency room doors, gasping for air, but my relief was short-lived. The commotion had drawn more infected from the surrounding area. They were closing in on the van. "Start the engine," I yelled, sprinting towards the vehicle. "Get ready to go." I could see the panic on the children's faces as I approached. The 14-year-old was in the driver's seat, his hands shaking as he turned the key. The engine roared to life just as I reached the van, yanking the door open and throwing myself inside. "Go, go, go," I shouted, and the boy stepped on the gas. We lurched forward, narrowly missing an infected that lunged for us. I took over the wheel, guiding us out of the parking lot and back onto the street. As we sped away, I could see the disappointment and fear on the little girl's face. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "We couldn't stay. It wasn't safe." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I know," she whispered. "I think I knew before. I just hoped." I felt a lump in my throat. In just a few hours, these kids had lost everything. Their families, their homes, their entire world. And here I was, a stranger, their only protection in this nightmare. "We're going to be okay," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We're going to find somewhere safe, I promise." As we drove away from the hospital, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something much worse. But where could we go now? The mall was still an option, but after what I'd seen at the hospital, I wasn't sure any public place would be safe. Then I remembered something, an old industrial complex on the outskirts of town. It had been abandoned for years, but the buildings were solid and easily defensible. It wasn't ideal, but it might be our best shot at finding a safe haven in this new, terrifying world. I turned the van in that direction, hoping against hope that we wouldn't encounter any more obstacles along the way. As we drove, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching the city burn behind us. Whatever was happening, wherever this outbreak had come from, I knew one thing for certain: the world as we knew it was over. The only question now was whether we could survive long enough to see what would take its place. The drive to the industrial complex was tense. Every intersection felt like a potential ambush. Every abandoned car a possible hiding place for the infected. The children huddled in the back, occasionally whimpering but mostly silent. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a horde of infected chasing us. As we approached the outskirts of the city, the chaos began to thin out. There were fewer cars on the road, fewer signs of struggle, but that didn't mean we were safe. If anything, the quiet made me more nervous. In my years of storm chasing, I'd learned that the calm often preceded the worst of the storm. We turned onto a narrow road leading to the industrial complex. Overgrown weeds pushed through cracks in the asphalt, and the skeletal frames of old factories loomed against the darkening sky. It was eerie, but at least it seemed deserted. I pulled up to the main gate, a rusted chain-link fence that had seen better days. "Stay here," I told the kids. "I'm going to check if it's safe." I got out of the van, my makeshift weapon, the heavy flashlight, clutched tightly in my hand. The gate was locked, but the fence beside it had a large hole, probably cut by local teens looking for a place to hang out. I squeezed through, wincing as the jagged edges of the fence caught on my clothes. The complex was silent, save for the whisper of wind through empty buildings. I moved cautiously, checking around corners, peering into shadowy doorways. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure it. After a tense few minutes, I was reasonably sure the place was empty, at least free of any immediate threats. I jogged back to the van. "Okay," I said, trying to sound calm for the kids' sake. "It looks clear. We're going to drive in and find a good place to set up camp. Everyone stay close and stay quiet, all right?" They nodded, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and exhaustion. I maneuvered the van through the hole in the fence and into the complex. We drove past several smaller buildings before I spotted what I was looking for, a large warehouse with few windows and a solid-looking door. I parked the van close to the entrance and turned to the kids. "All right, team, we're going to go inside and make this our home for a while. I need you all to be brave and help out, okay? Can you do that for me?" They nodded again, a bit more confidently this time. I was amazed at their resilience. These kids had been through hell, yet here they were, ready to face whatever came next. We piled out of the van and made our way to the warehouse door. It was locked, but a few solid kicks were enough to break it open. I winced at the noise, hoping it hadn't attracted any unwanted attention. The interior of the warehouse was dusty and filled with shadows, but it was dry and seemed structurally sound. Old machinery and empty shelving units were scattered around, providing potential cover if we needed it. "Okay," I said, "first things first, we need to secure this place. Let's see if we can find anything to block the doors and windows." We spent the next hour dragging heavy equipment in front of the doors and using old tarps and boards to cover the few ground-level windows. The physical labor seemed to help the kids, giving them something to focus on other than their fear. As we worked, I couldn't help but think about the weather patterns I'd been tracking before all this started. The erratic pressure systems, the strange auroras, the unexplained electromagnetic disturbances. There had to be a connection to the outbreak, but what? And more importantly, could understanding it help us survive? Once we had the warehouses, secure as we could make it, I gathered the kids in a circle. "Great job, everyone. Now let's take stock of what we have and what we need." We pooled our resources, which wasn't much. Some bottled water and snacks from the van, a few first aid kits, and whatever the kids had in their backpacks. It wasn't enough to last more than a day or two. "We need to find more supplies," I said, more to myself than to the kids. "Food, water, medical supplies, and weapons," I added silently in my head. One of the older boys, the one who had driven the van earlier, spoke up. "There's a big superstore about a mile from here. My family shops there sometimes. They have everything." I nodded, considering. A store like that would have everything we needed, but it would also be a prime target for other survivors or the infected. It would be dangerous, but we didn't have much choice. "Good thinking," I said. "We'll check it out tomorrow. For now, let's try to get some rest. It's been a long day." We used some old tarps and empty cardboard boxes to make makeshift beds. As the kids settled down, I couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. These children were depending on me for their survival, and I had no idea if I was up to the task. As the night wore on, I took the first watch, sitting near the door with my flashlight at the ready. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional whimper or murmur from the sleeping children. My mind wandered back to the weather station, to the data I'd downloaded before fleeing. I pulled out my laptop, thankful I'd had the presence of mind to grab it. As it booted up, I glanced nervously at the door, half expecting to see infected silhouettes shambling towards us. The screen flickered to life and I began poring over the data. Temperature fluctuations, pressure systems, electromagnetic readings, all far outside normal parameters. But what did it mean? How could weather patterns, no matter how unusual, lead to a zombie apocalypse? I was so engrossed in the data that I almost missed the sound. A faint scratching coming from one of the covered windows. I froze, my heart rate skyrocketing. Had they found us already? I moved silently to the window, pressing my ear against the rough wood we'd used to cover it. The scratching continued, accompanied by a low moaning that made my skin crawl. Definitely infected. I backed away slowly, trying to decide what to do. Wake the kids and run? Try to wait it out? As I deliberated, I heard more sounds coming from other parts of the warehouse. We were surrounded. I shook the nearest kid awake, pressing my finger to my lips to signal silence. One by one, I roused the children, guiding them to the center of the warehouse where we'd be furthest from the walls. "Listen to me," I whispered. "There are infected outside. We need to be very, very quiet. Can you do that for me?" They nodded, their eyes wide with fear. I could see some of them trembling, and my heart ached for what they were going through. The sounds outside were getting louder, moans and growls punctuated by the occasional thud against the walls. How many were out there, and how long before they found a way in? I looked around desperately for anything we could use as a weapon. My eyes fell on a rack of old tools in the corner, some heavy wrenches and hammers. Not ideal, but better than nothing. "Stay here," I whispered to the kids. "I'm going to get us some protection." I crept towards the tool rack, wincing at every creak of the floor under my feet. Just as I reached for a particularly hefty wrench, I heard a crash from the other side of the warehouse. They were breaking through. I grabbed as many tools as I could carry and rushed back to the kids. "Here," I said, handing out the makeshift weapons. "Only use these if you absolutely have to, okay?" The sounds of splintering wood and shattering glass filled the air. The infected were pouring in from multiple points, their glowing eyes visible in the dim light of my flashlight. "Stay together," I shouted, abandoning any pretense of stealth. "Move towards the van." We formed a tight circle, the younger kids in the center, the older ones and myself on the outside with our improvised weapons at the ready. We began to move, slowly but steadily, towards where we'd parked the van. The infected shambled towards us, their movements jerky but relentless. I swung my wrench, connecting with the head of the nearest one. It went down, but there were more, right behind it. We were almost to the van when one of the kids screamed. An infected had grabbed her ankle, its teeth bared and ready to bite. Without thinking, I brought my wrench down on its arm, hearing the sickening crunch of breaking bone. "Go, go, go!" I yelled, yanking the van's door open. The kids piled in and I jumped into the driver's seat. The key was still in the ignition, thank God. I turned it and the engine roared to life. Infected were all around us now, clawing at the windows, pounding on the hood. I threw the van into reverse, feeling the thud as we ran over several of them. Then I shifted into drive and floored it, crashing through the weakened warehouse door and out into the night. As we sped away from the industrial complex, I could see in the rearview mirror that we were being pursued. A horde of infected, larger than any I'd seen before, was streaming out of the warehouse. "Is everyone okay?" I called out, my eyes darting between the road ahead and the mirror. "Anyone hurt? Anyone bitten?" A chorus of shaky no's answered me. We'd made it out, but just barely. And now we were back where we started, driving through dangerous streets with no safe haven in sight. As the adrenaline began to wear off, the reality of our situation hit me. We couldn't keep running forever. We needed a real plan, a way to not just survive, but to understand what was happening and maybe, just maybe, find a way to stop it. I thought again about the weather data, about the patterns I'd seen. There had to be an answer there, a key to unraveling this nightmare. But first, we needed to find safety, supplies, and hopefully other survivors who might be able to help. As we drove through the eerily empty streets, I made a decision. We'd head for the superstore the boy had mentioned earlier. It was risky, but we needed supplies, and maybe we'd find other survivors there. And after that, well, I had an idea forming. It was a long shot, but it was all we had. "Hang on, everyone," I said, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "We're not out of this yet, but we're going to figure it out together." As we drove towards an uncertain future, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The outbreak, the weather anomalies, they were all connected somehow. And I was determined to find out how, no matter what it took, because understanding might be our only hope for survival in this new, terrifying world. The drive to the superstore was tense. Every shadow on the street looked like a potential threat, every abandoned car a possible ambush point. The kids were quiet in the back, exhausted and scared. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that horde of infected still on our tail. As we approached the store, I could see why the boy had suggested it. It was massive, a sprawling complex that probably stocked everything from groceries to electronics. In normal times, it would have been bustling with shoppers. Now it stood, silent and dark, its vast parking lot a graveyard of abandoned vehicles. I pulled up close to the entrance, my eyes scanning for any sign of movement. "Okay, team," I said, turning to face the kids. "Here's the plan. We're going to go in fast and quiet. Grab only what we need. Food, if you see anything useful, call it out, but don't wander off. Stay together, got it?" They nodded, their faces a mix of fear and determination. I was amazed at their resilience, but I knew they were counting on me to keep them safe. The weight of that responsibility was almost overwhelming. We got out of the van, moving as silently as we could towards the store's entrance. The automatic doors were dead, of course, but it didn't take much effort to pry them open. The interior of the store was pitch black, our flashlights creating small islands of light in the darkness. "Stay close," I whispered, leading the group towards the grocery section. We moved quickly, grabbing non-perishable foods and bottled water. I directed some of the older kids to the pharmacy section to look for medical supplies. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The store was too quiet, too empty. In a city this size, surely other survivors would have had the same idea as us, so where were they? We were almost finished when I heard it, a soft scraping sound coming from somewhere in the darkness beyond our flashlight beams. I froze, holding up a hand to signal the kids to stop. "What is it?" one of the younger girls whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm not sure," I replied, straining my ears. The sound came again, closer this time, and then I saw them, a pair of glowing eyes reflecting our flashlight beams. "Back to the van," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Now, quietly, we started to move, but it was too late. The infected, because that's what it had to be, let out a blood-curdling shriek, and suddenly the store was alive with answering cries. "Run!" I shouted, abandoning any pretense of stealth. We sprinted towards the exit, our arms laden with supplies. I could hear them behind us, their inhuman growls getting closer. We burst out of the store into the parking lot. "Get in the van!" I yelled, fumbling with the keys. The kids piled in, and I jumped into the driver's seat. Just as I was about to close the door, I felt a hand grab my ankle. I looked down to see an infected, its face a mask of hunger and rage, trying to pull me out of the van. I kicked frantically, finally connecting with its head. It fell back and I slammed the door shut. The engine roared to life and I floored it, tires squealing as we peeled out of the parking lot. In the rearview mirror, I could see a horde of infected pouring out of the store, but we were already pulling away. As we sped through the empty streets, my mind was racing. The infected in the store, they had been waiting, hiding. They were getting smarter, more organized. This wasn't just a mindless plague, it was evolving. "Is everyone okay?" I asked, my eyes darting between the road and the mirror. The kids murmured affirmatives, sounding shaken but unharmed. We drove in silence for a while, putting as much distance as we could between us and the superstore, but we couldn't keep driving forever. We needed a new plan, a new shelter. That's when I remembered something. Before all this started, I had been corresponding with a colleague at a research station in the mountains about 100 miles north of the city. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had been studying the same weather anomalies I had been tracking. If anyone might have answers about what was happening, it would be her. "Okay, team," I said, making a decision. "We're going to take a little road trip. I know someone who might be able to help us understand what's going on." As I explained the plan to the kids, I couldn't help but wonder what we'd find at the research station. Would Elena still be there? Would she have any answers? And most importantly, would it be safe? The drive to the mountains was long and nerve-wracking. We had to stop several times to clear abandoned vehicles from the road or to take detours around areas that looked too dangerous. Each time we stopped, I half expected to be swarmed by infected, but as we got further from the city, the signs of the outbreak became less frequent. The countryside was eerily peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos we'd left behind. It was nearly dawn when we finally reached the access road to the research station. The narrow, winding path was overgrown and rough, clearly not maintained. In some time, I drove slowly, wary of the steep drops on either side. As we rounded a bend, the research station came into view. It was a cluster of low, utilitarian buildings perched on a rocky outcrop. Solar panels glinted on the roofs, and a forest of antennas and satellite dishes sprouted from one of the structures. I pulled up to the main gate, which was closed and locked. There was an intercom panel next to it, and with a surge of hope, I saw a small green light indicating it was powered. I pressed the call button. For a long moment, there was nothing but static. Then, a voice crackled through the speaker, cautious and wary. "Who's there? Elena? How did you find?" I called out, recognizing her voice despite the distortion. "It's Zephyr Hawthorne. We worked together on the atmospheric anomaly project." There was a pause, then Elena's voice came back, sounding relieved, but still cautious. "Zephyr? My God, you're alive. Are you alone?" "No," I replied. "I've got a group of kids with me, survivors from the city. Elena, we need help, and I think you might have some answers about what's happening." Another pause, longer this time. I held my breath, acutely aware of how exposed we were out here. Finally, Elena spoke again. "All right, I'm opening the gate. Come in quickly and I'll close it behind you." The gate slid open with a mechanical whir and I drove through. In my rearview mirror, I watched it close behind us, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. We were safe for now, but what would we learn here? I parked near the main building and we all piled out of the van. The mountain air was crisp and clean, a welcome change from the decay-tinged atmosphere of the city. The door of the main building opened and a woman stepped out. Dr. Elena Rodriguez looked much as I remembered her from our video conferences, though more haggard and tired. Her eyes widened as she took in our group, especially the children. "Zephyr," she said, her voice a mix of relief and concern. "I can't believe you made it. When the communications went down, I feared the worst." "It's been a hell of a journey, Elena," I replied, "but we're here now and we need answers." Elena nodded, her face grim. "Come inside. There's a lot we need to discuss." We followed her into the building, the kids looking around in wonder at the high-tech equipment that filled the rooms. Elena led us to a large conference room and gestured for us to sit. "First things first," she said. "Are any of you injured? Bitten?" We all shook our heads. Elena visibly relaxed. "Good, that's good. Now, Zephyr, tell me everything that's happened." I recounted our story, from the first signs of the the outbreak to our harrowing journey to the research station. As I spoke, I could see Elena's face growing, more and more troubled. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to a large screen on the wall. "What I'm about to show you is going to sound crazy," she said, "but given what you've been through, I think you'll believe me." She tapped a few commands on a nearby keyboard, and the screen came to life. It showed a map of the world, covered in swirling patterns of color. "This," Elena said, "is a representation of the atmospheric anomalies we've been tracking. The colors represent different types of energy, electromagnetic, thermal, even some we haven't been able to identify." As we watched, the patterns on the screen began to move, swirling and pulsing. "This animation shows the progression over the past month," Elena explained. "Watch closely." The patterns continued to shift and change, growing more intense, and then red dots began to appear on the map. At first, just a few, then more and more, spreading like a virus across the continents. "The red dots," Elena said softly, "represent outbreak sites." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Are you saying the weather anomalies caused the outbreak?" Elena shook her head. "Not exactly. We think, based on the data we've gathered, that the anomalies are a side effect, a symptom, not the cause." "A symptom of what?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I knew the answer. Elena took a deep breath. "We believe the Earth is changing, evolving in a way we've never seen before. The weather patterns, the electromagnetic disturbances, even the zombie outbreak, they're all part of a larger transformation." The room was silent as we all tried to process this information. Finally, one of the older kids spoke up. "But why? Why is this happening?" Elena's face was grim. "We're not sure. It could be a natural process we've never encountered before. Or it could be a response to human activity, climate change, pollution. Or it could be something else entirely, something we can't even comprehend." I leaned forward, my mind racing. "Elena, this is bigger than we thought. We need to get this information out there. There might be other survivors, other scientists who could help us understand what's happening." Elena nodded. "I agree, but our communications are limited. We've been cut off from most of the world since the outbreak started." That's when an idea hit me. "The weather station," I said. "The one I was working at before all this started. It has powerful transmitters, satellite uplinks. If we could get back there, we might be able to broadcast this information globally." "It's risky," Elena said, her brow furrowed. "The city is probably overrun by now." "I know," I replied, "but what choice do we have? If what you're saying is true, if the Earth itself is changing, then understanding what's happening might be our only hope for survival." Nodded. "Elena, you're right. We need to try, but we'll need to prepare, gather supplies, plan our route carefully." As we began to discuss the details of our mission, I couldn't shake a feeling of both dread and excitement. We were on the verge of understanding something monumental, something that could change everything, but the path to that understanding was fraught with danger. I looked at the kids, at Elena, at the map still swirling on the screen. Whatever was coming, whatever changes the Earth had in store for us, we would face it together. And maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to survive in this new, evolving world. The next few days at the research station were a flurry of activity. Elena and I worked tirelessly, poring over data and formulating plans for our return to the city. The kids, bless them, did their best to help, organizing supplies and keeping watch from the station's observation deck. One morning, as I was reviewing satellite imagery of the city, I noticed something strange. The infected seemed to be moving in patterns, almost as if they were being directed by some unseen force. I called Elena over to take a look. "You see it too?" she asked, her brow furrowed in concentration. I nodded. "It's like they're organizing, but how? They're supposed to be mindless, driven only by hunger." Elena's face was grim. "I have a theory about that. Remember how I said the Earth was changing, evolving? I think the infected are part of that evolution. They're adapting, becoming more than just mindless zombies." The implications of her words sent a chill down my spine. If the infected were evolving, becoming smarter, more organized, our mission to the weather station just got a whole lot more dangerous. We spent the next day preparing for our journey. Elena had a small arsenal stored at the station for research protection, she said with a wry smile. We divided the weapons and supplies among ourselves, making sure everyone, even the younger kids, had some means of defense. As we loaded up our vehicles, a beat-up SUV we'd found in the station's garage and my trusty van, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. We were heading back into the heart of danger, and there was no guarantee we'd all make it out alive. The drive down from the mountains was tense, but uneventful. As we approached the outskirts of the city, however, the signs of the outbreak became more and more apparent. Abandoned cars littered the highway, some with doors left open as if their occupants had fled in a hurry. The eerie silence was broken only by the occasional distant scream or inhuman growl. We stopped about a mile from the weather station turned to assess the situation. Through my binoculars, I could see that the area around the station was crawling with infected, but there was something off about their behavior. They seemed to be patrolling, moving in organized patterns. "Elena," I whispered, handing her the binoculars. "Look at this. Tell me I'm not imagining things." She looked for a long moment, then handed the binoculars back, her face pale. "You're not imagining it. They're guarding the station, but how? Why?" I shook my head at a loss for words. This was beyond anything we had anticipated. The infected weren't just evolving, they were strategizing. We retreated a safe distance to regroup and form a new plan. It was clear that a frontal assault on the weather station was out of the question. We needed a distraction, something to draw the infected away long enough for a small team to sneak in and access the communication equipment. That's when one of the older kids, a boy named Alex, spoke up. "What about the storm sirens? If we could activate them from a distance, it might draw the infected away." I exchanged a look with Elena. It was risky, but it might just work. The city's emergency system was designed to be activated remotely in case of severe weather. If we could hack into it, we might be able to create the diversion we needed. We spent the next few hours setting up a makeshift command center in an abandoned office building, using some of the equipment we'd brought from the research station. Elena and Alex worked on hacking into the emergency system, while the rest of us prepared for the infiltration. As night fell, we were ready. Elena gave me a nod, her finger hovering over the enter key on her laptop. "On your signal, Zephyr." I took a deep breath, looking at each member of our team. "Remember the plan. When the sirens start, we move fast and quiet. Get to the station, transmit the data, and get out. No heroics, no delays. Understood?" Everyone nodded, their faces a mix of determination and fear. I turned back to Elena. "Do it." She pressed the key, and moments later, the night was filled with the wailing of storm sirens. The effect on the infected was immediate. They began to move, en masse towards the sound, leaving the area around the weather station significantly less guarded, and our small team moved out. We crept through the darkened streets, every shadow a potential threat. As we neared the station, I could see that our plan had worked, but not perfectly. There were still a few infected milling about, but far fewer than before. We managed to take them out silently, using the hand-to-hand combat techniques Elena had taught us. Then we were at the door of the station. I input the access code with shaking fingers, praying it still worked. The light turned green, and the door clicked open. We were in. The interior of the station was dark and eerily quiet. We moved swiftly to the main control room, our flashlights casting long shadows on the walls. Everything seemed untouched, preserved. In the moment when the outbreak had begun, I sat down at the main console, my fingers flying over the keyboard as I brought the systems online. "Elena," I called softly, "start uploading the data." She plugged in a hard drive and began the transfer. The progress bar crept slowly across the screen, each percentage feeling like an eternity. Suddenly, an alarm blared through the station. On one of the security monitors, I could see a horde of infected charging towards the building. They had figured out our ruse. "How much longer?" I asked Elena, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. 2 minutes, she replied, her eyes fixed on the screen. I turned to the rest of the team. "Barricade the doors. We need to buy her more time." We worked frantically, pushing heavy equipment against the doors. The sounds of the infected grew, louder, their inhuman shrieks echoing through the halls. "Done!" Elena shouted just as the first impacts shuddered through the barricade. I quickly initiated the global broadcast. "This is Dr. Zephyr Hawthorne." I spoke into the microphone, my voice shaking slightly. "To anyone who can hear this, we have crucial information about the outbreak and the changes happening to our planet. The data being transmitted contains everything we know. Please, if you're out there, if you're still fighting, use this information. It might be our only hope." As I finished, the barricade gave way with a thunderous crash. Infected poured into the room, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Elena's hand and pulling her towards the emergency exit. We burst out into the night, the sounds of pursuit close behind us. We sprinted towards our vehicles, the infected hot on our heels. As we piled in and sped away, I could see in the rearview mirror that we were being followed, not just by a random horde, but by an organized pursuit. "They're hurting us," Elena said, her voice filled with a mix of fear and scientific curiosity. I nodded grimly, swerving to avoid an abandoned car. "But hurting us where and why?" As if in answer, we rounded a corner and came face to face with a massive blockade. Hundreds of infected stood in our path, their eyes glowing in the darkness. But they weren't attacking, they were waiting. I slammed on the brakes, bringing our small convoy to a screeching halt. We were surrounded, trapped between the pursuing horde and the blockade. "What do we do now?" one of the kids asked, fear evident in their voice. I looked at Elena, then at the sea of infected surrounding us. They were still just watching, waiting. It was clear they could have overwhelmed us at any moment, but they were holding back. Why? That's when I saw it. The infected in front of us were parting, creating a path, and walking down that path was a figure that made my blood run cold. It looked human, but not quite. Its skin had the same grayish pallor as the other infected, but its eyes, instead of the mindless hunger we'd come to expect, held an intelligence that was terrifyingly clear. It stopped a few meters from our vehicles and spoke, its voice a rasping parody of human speech. "We've been waiting for you, Dr. Hawthorne. We have much to discuss." I exchanged a shocked look with Elena. The infected hadn't just evolved, they had developed a hive mind, a leader, and somehow they knew who I was. As I stared at the creature before us, I realized that everything we thought we knew about the outbreak, about the changes happening to our world, was just the tip of the iceberg. We were on the cusp of something much bigger, much more terrifying than we had ever imagined. The leader of the infected tilted its head, an eerily human gesture. "Come," it said. "It's time you understood what's really happening to your world." I looked at my companions, at the sea of infected surrounding us, at this impossible being addressing us. Whatever came next would change everything, but did we have a choice? To understand, to survive, we had to follow. With a deep breath, I opened the car door and stepped out. As I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into the next chapter of human history, for better or for worse. The world had changed, and now it was time for us to change with it. Us through the city streets, the horde parting before us like a macabre sea. I kept the kids close, my hand never straying far from my weapon. Elena walked beside me, her scientific curiosity warring with obvious fear on her face. Our strange procession arrived at what used to be City Hall. The grand building was now a grotesque parody of its former self, organic growths snaking up its walls and pulsing with an eerie bioluminescence. The sight made my skin crawl, but I couldn't look away. "Welcome," the leader said, its voice a rasping imitation of hospitality, "to the new heart of our city." As we entered the building, I was struck by how much it had changed. The interior was a maze of organic matter, pulsing and shifting as if alive. In the center of what used to be the main atrium stood a massive tree-like structure, its branches reaching to every corner of the room. "What is this place?" I asked, unable to keep the mix of awe and revulsion from my voice. The leader turned to me, its eyes glowing with an unnatural intelligence. "This is our nexus, the center of our collective consciousness. It's here that we commune with the earth itself." Elena stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. "You're in communication with the planet? How is that possible?" The leader's face twisted into what might have been a smile. "Your kind has always seen the earth as something separate, something to be conquered and exploited. We understand the truth that we are all part of a greater whole." As it spoke, tendrils from the central structure began to move, reaching out towards us. I instinctively pulled back, but the leader held up a hand. "Do not be afraid. This is how we share knowledge." Before I could protest, a tendril touched my forehead. Suddenly, my mind was flooded with images, sensations, knowledge. I saw the earth as a living entity, pulsing with energy and life. I felt the pain of centuries of exploitation and abuse, the rising fever of climate change. And then I understood the outbreak for what it truly was, a planetary immune response. When the vision ended, I staggered back, gasping. Elena caught me, her eyes wide with concern. "Zephyr, what happened? What did you see?" I struggled to find words to describe the experience. "The earth, it's alive, conscious, and we, humanity, were like a virus to it. The outbreak, the infected, their antibodies trying to restore balance." The leader nodded, its eerie approximation of a smile widening. "You understand now. We are not your enemy. We are the Earth's defense against the real threat, human exploitation and destruction." I looked around at my companions, seeing the same mix of shock and disbelief on their faces. The kids huddled together, frightened but also fascinated by what was happening. "But why?" I asked, turning back to the leader. "Why now? And why like this?" The leader's expression turned grim. The tipping point was reached. The Earth's systems could no longer sustain the damage being inflicted. A drastic response was necessary. Elena spoke up, her voice shaking slightly. "But surely there could have been another way, one that didn't involve the death and suffering of millions." The leader tilted its head, an eerily human gesture. "From the perspective of a planetary consciousness, the suffering of individuals is inconsequential compared to the survival of the whole. But we are not without compassion. Those who join us, who become part of our collective, no longer suffer." A chill ran down my spine at these words. "Join you? You mean become infected?" "Transformed," the leader corrected. "Elevated. We offer you this choice now. Join us, become part of something greater than yourselves. Help us heal the earth." I looked at my companions, seeing the fear and uncertainty in their eyes. The offer was tempting in a way, to be part of something larger, to no longer bear the burden of individual existence in this harsh new world. But the cost, our humanity, our individuality, was it too high? What happens if we refuse? I asked, already suspecting the answer. The leader's expression hardened. Then you will be seen as part of the infection that plagues this planet, and we will respond accordingly. The threat hung in the air, heavy and ominous. I knew we had to make a decision, and quickly, but how could we choose between losing our humanity and facing almost certain death? That's when I had an idea, a desperate, possibly insane idea, but it was all we had. What if there was another way? I said, my mind racing. A way for humanity to coexist with the Earth, to help heal the damage we've done without losing ourselves. The leader looked intrigued. Explain. I took a deep breath, hoping I wasn't making a terrible mistake. You have access to knowledge, to the Earth's consciousness. We have human ingenuity, creativity. What if we worked together, found a way to restore balance without resorting to this? There was a long moment of silence. The organic growths around us pulsed and shifted, as if considering my words. Finally, the leader spoke. Your proposal is intriguing, but how can we trust that humanity will follow through? Your kind has a long history of broken promises. Then let us prove it, I said, my voice growing stronger with conviction. Give us a chance to show that we can change, that we can be part of the solution instead of the problem. The leader was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, it nodded. Very well, we will give you this chance. But know this, if you fail, if humanity continues on its destructive path, we will not be so lenient next time. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the weight of responsibility that now rested on our shoulders. We had just become humanity's representatives in a negotiation for our very survival. What do we do now? Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The leader gestured towards the central structure. We will impart to you the knowledge you need, the understanding of the Earth's systems, the damage that has been done, and what needs to be healed. It will be up to you to find a way to implement this knowledge, to convince your fellow humans to change their ways. One by one, we stepped forward to receive this knowledge. As the tendrils touched us, our minds were flooded with information, understanding beyond anything we had ever imagined. It was overwhelming, almost painful in its intensity, but also awe-inspiring. When it was over, we stood there, gasping and reeling from the experience. We now carried within us the key to potentially saving humanity and healing the Earth, but the real challenge was just beginning. Go now, the leader said. Spread this knowledge. Show us that humanity can change, can be a force for healing rather than destruction. We will be watching. As we left City Hall, our minds brimming with new understanding and our hearts heavy with responsibility, I couldn't help but feel a mix of hope and trepidation. We had been given a chance, a reprieve from extinction, but the task ahead of us was monumental. We made our way back to our vehicles in silence, each of us lost in thought, trying to process everything we had learned and experienced. As we drove out of the city, I looked back at the transformed skyline, at the organic growths that now covered many of the buildings. What do we do now, Zephyr? One of the kids asked, breaking the silence. I took a deep breath, considering our next move. We need to get this information out there. We need to show people what's really happening, what's at stake, and we need to start working on solutions, ways to implement this knowledge we've been given. Elena nodded, her face set with determination. The research station, we can use its equipment to analyze this data, to start formulating plans. And we need to contact other survivors, I added. Scientists, engineers, anyone who can help us figure this out. We're going to need all the help we can get. As we drove into the night, leaving the transformed city behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the cusp of something monumental. We had been given a second chance, not just for ourselves, but for all of humanity and the Earth itself. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with challenges and dangers. We would face skepticism, resistance, maybe even hostility from those who couldn't or wouldn't understand, but we had to try. The alternative was unthinkable. I looked at my companions, at these brave souls who had been through so much with me. We were an unlikely group of saviors, a weather scientist, a handful of kids, and a researcher who had seen the apocalypse coming. But we were all that stood between humanity and extinction. As the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had survived the outbreak, faced down the infected, and now we carried within us the knowledge that could save our world. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever is. The Earth had given us a chance to redeem ourselves, to prove that we could be more than just a destructive force. Now it was up to us to seize that chance, to fight not just for our survival, but for a new way of existing in harmony with our planet. The future was uncertain, but for the first time since this all began, it held the possibility of hope. We had weathered the storm of the outbreak, and now we were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, we would find a way to heal our world and secure a future for humanity. As we drove towards the rising sun, I couldn't help but feel that this was not the end of our story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where humanity would either rise to the challenge of coexisting with our living planet planet or face the consequences of our failure. The choice was ours to make, and I for one made the right one. The journey back to the research station was tense. Every mile felt like it brought new dangers, not just from the infected, but from the very Earth itself. The knowledge we now carried weighed heavily on us all. We understood the planet's pain, its desperate attempt to heal itself, but that understanding didn't make our task any easier. As we drove, I noticed changes in the landscape that I hadn't seen before. Plants seemed more vibrant, growing in patterns that seemed almost intentional. The sky held colors I'd never seen, shimmering with energy that I now recognized as the Earth's life force. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. We arrived at the research station just as the sun was setting. The familiar buildings were a welcome sight, but they felt different now. We were different. As we unloaded our vehicles, I could see the strain on everyone's faces. We'd been through so much, and our journey was far from over. Elena immediately set to work, connecting the data we'd received to the station's powerful computers. The rest of us gathered supplies and secured the perimeter. Even though we'd been given a reprieve by the infected, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't entirely safe. As night fell, we gathered in the main lab. Elena had set up a holographic display of the Earth, pulsing with the energy patterns. We now understood. It was mesmerizing and sobering all at once. "So," I said, breaking the silence that had fallen over the group, "where do we start?" Elena stepped forward, her face illuminated by the glow of the hologram. "We need to analyze this data, find patterns, understand exactly what the Earth needs to heal. Then we can start formulating solutions." One of the older kids, Alex, spoke up. "But how do we convince people? Most of the world probably doesn't even know what's really happening. They just see monsters, not, well, whatever the infected really are." It was a good point. We had the knowledge, but getting the rest of humanity to understand and act on it would be a monumental task. "We start small," I said, an idea forming. "We use the station's communication equipment to reach out to other scientists, other survivors. We share what we know, gather more data, build a network." Elena nodded. "And we can use the weather patterns to our advantage. If we can predict where the Earth will act next, we can warn people, maybe even prevent more outbreaks." It was a start, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. We needed to do more, to show the world that change was possible. That's when I remembered something from the vision the infected leader had shared with us. "The Nexus," I said suddenly, "the organic structure in the city center. What if we could create something similar but controlled by us? A way to communicate directly with the Earth, to show it that we're trying to help." The room fell silent as everyone considered this. It was a radical idea, one that blurred the line between science and something almost spiritual. But after everything we'd seen, everything we now knew, it didn't seem impossible. "It could work," Elena said slowly, "but we'd need resources, equipment we don't have here, and we'd need to go back into the city." The thought of returning to that transformed urban landscape sent a shiver down my spine. But I knew we had no choice. If we were going to save humanity, to heal the Earth, we had to take risks. "We'll go," I said, "but first, we need to reach out, gather allies. We can't do this alone." Over the next few days, we worked tirelessly. Elena and I took turns broadcasting our message, reaching out to anyone who might be listening. We shared our knowledge, our plan, our hope for a future where humanity and the Earth could coexist. Slowly, responses started coming in. Other scientists who had noticed the strange patterns, survivors who had encountered the infected and lived to tell the tale, even a few government officials who had managed to maintain some semblance of order in their regions. With each new contact, our network grew. We shared data, theories, and resources. It wasn't always easy, convincing people of the truth, but the evidence was hard to ignore. The Earth was changing, evolving, and we had to evolve with it or face extinction. As our understanding grew, so did our plan. We identified key locations around the world where we could establish communication nodes, similar to the Nexus we'd seen in the city. These would allow us to interact with the Earth's consciousness, to show it our intentions and our efforts to heal the damage we'd done. But we knew it wouldn't be enough to just communicate. We had to act, using the knowledge given to us by the infected. We began developing new technologies, clean energy systems that worked in harmony with the Earth's natural energy flows, agricultural methods that restored soil health instead of depleting it, water purification systems that mimic processes. It was exhausting, exhilarating work. Every day brought new challenges, new discoveries. The kids, who I'd once seen as a responsibility, a burden to protect, became invaluable members of our team. Their young minds, unburdened by preconceived notions of what was possible, came up with solutions that amazed us all. But as we worked, we couldn't ignore the reports coming in from around the world. The infected were still out there, still spreading. In some areas, they were becoming more aggressive, as if the Earth's patience with humanity was wearing thin. mission. We were in a race against time, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. After weeks of preparation, we knew it was time. We had to return to the city to establish our first communication node. It was risky, but we had no choice. If we couldn't prove to the Earth that humanity could change, that we could be part of the solution instead of the problem, all our work would be for nothing. We loaded up our vehicles with the equipment we'd need: solar panels, bioengineered plants that could rapidly grow into the structures we needed, communication devices that could translate our intentions into a form the Earth could understand. It felt like we were embarking on some kind of sci-fi mission, but this was our new reality. As we approached the city limits, I couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. The last time we'd driven this road, we'd been fleeing for our lives. Now we were returning, not as victims or survivors, but as ambassadors for all of humanity. The city had changed even more in our absence. The organic growths had spread, covering more buildings, reshaping the urban landscape into something alien yet strangely beautiful. As we drove through the streets, I saw infected watching us, but they didn't attack. They seemed to be waiting, observing. We made our way to a park in the center of the city. It felt right, establishing our connection to the Earth in a place that had once been a small oasis of nature in the urban sprawl. As we unloaded our equipment, I could feel the anticipation building. This was it, the moment that would determine the future of our species. Elena and I began setting up the core of our communication node. The bioengineered plants we'd developed began to grow at an astounding rate, intertwining with our technology, creating a structure that pulsed with life and energy. As the final connections were made, I placed my hand on the central console. I could feel the energy thrumming through it, the heartbeat of the Earth itself. Taking a deep breath, I opened my mind, reaching out to the consciousness we now knew existed. The sensation was overwhelming. I felt the immensity of the planet's awareness, its pain, its anger, but also its hope. Images flashed through my mind. The history of Earth and humanity intertwined. The damage we'd done, but also the beauty we'd created. I pushed forward, projecting our intentions, our plans, our commitment to change. I showed the Earth the technologies we'd developed, the new ways of living in harmony with nature that we were ready to implement. I pleaded for time, for a chance to prove ourselves. For a moment, there was silence. Then slowly I felt a shift. The anger subsided, replaced by a cautious optimism. The Earth was listening. It was willing to give us a chance. As I came back to myself, I opened my eyes to see my companions watching me anxiously. "Well?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. It worked. We've made contact. The Earth understands. It's willing to work with us. The relief in the group was palpable. We'd taken the first step, opened a dialogue that could save our species and heal our planet. But I knew this was just the beginning. We had a long road ahead of us, convincing the rest of humanity to change, implementing our new technologies on a global scale, continuing to prove our worth to the living planet we called home. As we began to pack up our equipment, preparing to return to the research station and share our success with our growing network of allies, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. We'd faced the apocalypse, stared down the end of humanity, and found a way forward. The Earth was alive, aware, and we were no longer its enemy. We were its partners in healing, in creating a new future for all life on this planet. It wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, setbacks, moments of doubt, but we had been given a second chance, and I was determined to make the most of it. As we drove out of the city, I looked back at our communication node, now a living, pulsing beacon of hope in the transformed urban landscape. We had survived the storm, navigated the chaos of the outbreak, and emerged with a new understanding of our place in the world. The future was uncertain, but for the first time since this all began, it held the promise of something better and found a new purpose. We had weathered the... Now, it was time to rebuild, to heal, and to create a world where humanity and nature could thrive together. The days following our successful communication with the Earth were a whirlwind of activity. Our network of survivors and scientists grew exponentially as word spread of what we'd accomplished. People were desperate for hope, for a way forward in this changed world, and we offered both. But with hope came new challenges. As we shared our knowledge and plans, we encountered resistance. Some refused to believe the Earth was sentient, dismissing our claims as the ravings of trauma-addled survivors. Others accepted the truth, but balked at the changes we proposed, clinging to old ways of life that were no longer sustainable. We knew we needed to do more than just talk. We had to show the world that change was possible, that we could live in harmony with the Earth. That's when Elena proposed our most ambitious project yet, a self-sustaining eco-city that would serve as a model for the future. The location we chose was symbolic, a sprawling, abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of our city. It was a place that represented the old way of thinking, of exploiting the Earth's resources without regard for the consequences. We would transform it into a beacon of hope, a living example of how humanity could thrive while healing the planet. As we began the work of clearing the site and laying the foundations for our new city, we faced our first major setback. A group of survivors, led by a former corporate CEO, attacked our camp. They saw our efforts as a threat to their way of life, to the power structures that had brought the world to the brink of destruction. The battle was fierce. We had the advantage of our connection to the Earth, able to sense danger through the subtle shifts in the environment around us. But our attackers were desperate and well-armed. In the chaos, I lost sight of Elena and some of the kids. My heart raced as I searched for them, dodging gunfire and trying to coordinate our defense. Just when it seemed we might be overwhelmed, the ground beneath us trembled. At first I thought it was an earthquake, another sign of the Earth's distress. But then I saw them, emerging from the woods surrounding the complex. The infected had come, but not as mindless attackers. They moved with purpose, surrounding our attackers, herding them away from our fledgling city. As the dust settled and we tended to our wounded, I finally found Elena. She was dirty and bruised but alive, helping to treat a young boy who'd been caught in the crossfire. Our eyes met, and I saw in hers the same mix of relief and determination that I felt. We had survived again. Head was still long and fraught with danger. Days that followed, we redoubled our efforts. The attack had shown us how fragile our progress was, how easily fear and ignorance could undo everything we'd worked for. We needed to move faster, to show results that even the most skeptical couldn't ignore. Our eco-city began to take shape. We used the bioengineered plants we'd developed to create living buildings that grew and adapted to our needs. Solar panels and wind turbines designed to work in harmony with the Earth's energy flows provided clean power. Water recycling systems mimicked natural processes, ensuring not a drop was wasted. But the heart of our city was the Nexus, a larger version of the communication node we'd established earlier. It pulsed with life, a direct link to the Earth's consciousness. Through it, we could sense the planet's needs, adjusting our efforts in real time to promote healing and balance. As word of our city spread, people began to arrive, survivors seeking a safe haven, scientists eager to contribute to our work, even former skeptics curious to see if the rumors were true. Our community grew, and with it, our impact on the world around us. We noticed changes in the environment almost immediately. The air became cleaner, the soil more fertile. Plants and animals that had been driven to the brink of extinction began to return. It was as if the Earth itself was responding to our efforts, healing faster than we had dared to hope. But we knew we couldn't rest on our laurels. Our city was just the beginning. We needed to spread our knowledge, our technologies to every corner of the globe, and we needed to do it quickly before the damage to the Earth became irreversible. That's when we received the transmission that would change everything. It came through our nexus, a burst of information directly from the Earth's consciousness. At first we couldn't make sense of it, the images and sensations too alien for our minds to process. But as we studied it, a chilling realization set in. The Earth was warning us of a new threat, one that made our previous struggles seem trivial. In comparison, something was coming, something from beyond our world. Alien intelligence, we couldn't tell, but one thing was clear. It posed a danger not just to humanity, but to all life on Earth. As we grappled with this new information, trying to decipher more details from the Earth's warning, we were faced with a terrible choice. Do we share this knowledge with the rest of the world, potentially causing panic and undoing all the progress we'd made? Or do we keep it to ourselves, working in secret to prepare for a threat we barely understood? The debate raged among our leadership. Elena argued for transparency, believing that humanity deserved to know the truth, no matter how frightening. Others counseled caution, fearing that the knowledge would lead to chaos and a return to the destructive behaviors we'd worked so hard to change. In the end, the decision fell to me. As I stood before our community, preparing to address them, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. Whatever I decided would shape the future of not just our city, but all of humanity and the Earth itself. I took a deep breath and began to speak. My friends, we have faced incredible challenges. Together, we've survived the outbreak, communicated with the living consciousness of our planet, and begun the work of healing the damage we've done. But now we face a new test, one that will require everything we've learned and more. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces before me. I saw fear in some, determination in others, and in all, a trust that humbled me. The Earth has sent us a warning. A threat is coming, one that endangers not just us, but all life on this planet. We don't fully understand it yet, but we know it's beyond anything we've faced before. A murmur ran through the crowd. I could see the panic beginning to set in, but I pressed on. I know this is frightening. Believe me, I'm scared too. But we've overcome so much already. We've learned to work with the Earth, to be part of its healing rather than its destruction. And now, we must take that partnership to a new level. I gestured to the nexus behind me, its pulsing energy a visible reminder of our connection to the planet. We're not alone in this fight. The Earth itself is our ally. Together we can prepare, we can adapt, we can find a way to face this threat. As I spoke, I could feel a change in the atmosphere. The fear was still there, but it was being replaced by something else. Determination, resolve, a collective will to face whatever was coming, not as separate individuals, but as a united force in harmony with our living planet. We have work to do, I continued. We need to accelerate our research, expand our network, prepare our defenses. But more than that, we need to spread our message farther and faster faster than ever before. The whole world needs to understand what's at stake and join us in this effort. I looked out at the crowd, meeting as many eyes as I could. It won't be easy. We'll face resistance, disbelief, maybe even hostility. But we've overcome those obstacles before, and we'll do it again, because we have to, not just for ourselves, but for all life on Earth and for the Earth itself. As I finished speaking, a hush fell over the gathering. For a moment, I feared I'd made the wrong choice, that the weight of this knowledge would crush the spirit of our community. But then, slowly at first, and then with growing volume, applause began to spread through the crowd. It wasn't the applause of blind optimism or false bravado, but the determined acknowledgement of people ready to face a challenge head-on. In the days that followed, our city was a hive of activity. We broadcast our warning to the world, sharing what we knew of the coming threat and our plans to face it. As expected, the reactions were mixed. Some dismissed us as alarmists or conspiracy theorists. Others responded with fear and panic. But many, more than we had dared to hope, answered our call. Our network expanded rapidly. Other eco-cities began to spring up around the world, each with its own nexus connecting to the Earth's consciousness. We shared knowledge, resources, and technology, working together in a way humanity never had before. As we prepared for the unknown threat, we also continued our work of healing the Earth. The two goals were intertwined, we realized. The healthier our planet, the stronger our defense against whatever was coming. Months passed and we saw incredible progress. The Earth's healing accelerated, driven by our combined efforts. The infected, once seen as monsters, became our allies, helping us understand and work with the planet's own immune system. But even as we celebrated our achievements, we couldn't shake the sense of foreboding. The threat was still out there, drawing closer with each passing day. We were in a race against time, and the finish line was shrouded in mystery. As I stood on the roof of our main research building, looking out over the thriving eco-city we'd built, I felt a mix of pride. We'd come so far, achieved so much, but would it be enough? Could we really face a threat we barely understood, one that had the Earth itself worried? I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see Elena. Her face showed the same mix of emotions I was feeling. "Whatever's coming," she said softly, "we'll face it together. All of us, humanity and the Earth as one." I nodded, drawing strength from her words and presence. We'd survived the apocalypse, reformed our entire way of life, and forged a bond with our living planet. Whatever this new threat was, we would meet it head-on, united in purpose and spirit. As the sun set on our city, casting a golden glow over the living buildings and thriving greenery, I allowed myself a moment of hope. We were no longer the destructive force we had once been. We were protectors now, guardians of life, partners with the Earth itself, and together, we were ready to face whatever the universe had in store for us. The day the threat arrived came sooner than we expected. I was in the Nexus chamber, communing with the Earth, when I felt it, a disturbance so profound it made my entire body tremble. The Earth's consciousness recoiled in fear and confusion, a sensation that echoed through every living thing connected to the planet. I stumbled out of the chamber, my mind reeling from the intensity of the experience. Elena was there, her face pale with shock. "Zephyr," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "look at the sky." I followed her gaze upward and felt my breath catch in my throat. The sky was wrong. Colors swirled and shifted in patterns that defied physics, and through gaps in the chaos I could see what looked like other worlds, alien landscapes that hurt my eyes to look at. Alarms blared throughout our city as our sensors detected massive energy fluctuations. Reports flooded in from our global network, all describing the same phenomenon. Whatever was coming had arrived, and it was reshaping reality itself. We gathered in the command center, our team of scientists and leaders trying to make sense of the data pouring in. The Earth was feeding us information through the Nexus, but it was fragmented, confused. This threat was as alien to our living planet as it was to us. "It's some kind of interdimensional incursion," Elena said, her fingers flying over a holographic display. "The barriers between realities are breaking down. If we don't find a way to stop it, our world could be overwritten entirely." The gravity of the situation hit me like a physical blow. We had prepared for so much, but how could we fight something that defied the very laws of our universe? That's when I remembered something from the knowledge the Earth had shared with us months ago. A hint of an ancient defense mechanism buried deep within the planet's core, something that had been used eons ago to protect Earth from cosmic threats. "The planetary shield," I said, the idea forming as I spoke. "The Earth has the ability to generate an energy field that can protect it from external forces, but it needs our help to activate it." Elena's eyes widened with understanding. "The Nexus points. If we can channel enough energy through them simultaneously, we might be able to trigger the shield." It was a desperate plan, but it was all we had. We sent out the call to every eco-city, every Nexus point around the globe. We would need everyone working in perfect synchronization to have a chance. As we prepared, the situation situation outside grew worse. The sky continued to fracture, and reports came in of strange creatures emerging from the rifts. The infected moved to engage them, but it was clear they were outmatched. Humanity's last line of defense was faltering. In our Nexus chamber, we gathered everyone who could maintain a connection with the Earth. The kids we had saved so long ago, now young adults, stood with us, their faces set with determination. We had all come so far, learned so much. Now it was time to put it all to the test. I took my place at the center of the chamber, feeling the energy of the Earth pulsing through me. Around the world, I knew others were doing the same. Our consciousness expanded, linking with the planet and with each other. In that moment, we were one entity, humanity and Earth united against a cosmic threat. The process was agonizing. The amount of energy we were channeling was beyond anything we had ever attempted. I could feel my body straining under the pressure, my mind stretched to its limits. But I held on. We all did, driven by the knowledge that we were Earth's last hope. Through our expanded awareness, I could sense the shield beginning to form. It started as a faint shimmer around the planet, growing stronger with each passing second. The alien invaders reacted, their attacks intensifying as they sensed the threat to their incursion. For a moment, it seemed we might fail. The strain was too much, the enemy too strong. I felt minds wavering. In desperation, I reached out not just to the humans in our network, but to every living thing on the planet. Plants, animals, even the infected. I called to them all, pleading for their help, and they responded. I felt a surge of energy unlike anything I had ever experienced. Every blade of grass, every insect, every creature in the depths of the oceans joined our effort. The Earth itself seemed to rally, drawing on reserves of power hidden in its core. With a final, monumental effort, the shield snapped into place. A wave of energy pulsed outward, sealing the rifts in reality and pushing back the alien invaders. The fractured sky healed, returning to its familiar blue. As the connection faded and I returned to normal awareness, I collapsed to the floor of the Nexus chamber, utterly drained. Around me, I could see others in similar states of exhaustion, but there was also joy, relief, and a sense of awe at what we had just accomplished. Elena helped me to my feet, her eyes shining with tears and triumph. "We did it," she said, her voice hoarse. "We actually did it." I nodded, too overwhelmed for words. We had faced a threat of cosmic proportions and emerged victorious. Humanity and Earth working as one had proven equal to the challenge. In the days that followed, we began to understand the full scope of what had happened. The shield we had generated wasn't just a defensive barrier. It had fundamentally altered Earth's place in the universe, protecting it from future incursions and imbuing every living thing on the planet with a fraction of its power. We were different now, enhanced. The connection to the Earth that we had worked so hard to establish was now an intrinsic part of every human, every animal, every plant. We could sense the planet's needs instinctively and work to heal and protect it without conscious effort. The infected, no longer needed as the Earth's immune system, began to revert to their human forms, but they retained their connection to the planet, becoming intermediaries between humanity and the Earth's consciousness. As we rebuilt and recovered from the alien attack, we knew that our world would never be the same. The threat had been existential, but it had also been a catalyst, forcing us to tap into potential we never knew we had. Our eco-cities expanded, the technology we had developed spreading rapidly across the globe. The shield's energy accelerated the healing of the environment, undoing centuries of damage in a matter of months. Deserts bloomed, polluted waters ran clear, and the air cleared of toxins. But even as we celebrated our victory and marveled at our new world, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. We had defeated one threat, yes, but in doing so, we had revealed ourselves to the cosmos. Earth was no longer an isolated planet, but a beacon of life and power in the universe. What other threats might be out there? What challenges awaited us among the stars? And were we ready to face them? As I stood on the roof of our main building, looking out over our thriving city and the rejuvenated landscape beyond, I felt a familiar presence beside me. Elena, my partner through all of this, from the first days of the outbreak to our cosmic victory. "What are you thinking?" she asked, following my gaze to the horizon. I took a deep breath, considering my words carefully. "I'm thinking that this isn't the end. It's a new beginning. We've saved our world, but in doing so, we've set foot on a path that leads to the stars." Elena nodded, understanding in her eyes. "You think there's more out there, more threats, more wonders?" "I'm sure of it," I replied, "and I think we have a responsibility now, not just to Earth, but to life itself. We've been given this gift, this connection, this power. We need to use it wisely." As if in response to my words, I felt a pulse of energy from the Earth beneath my feet, a sense of agreement, of anticipation. Our planet, once threatened with destruction, was now ready to take its place in the greater universe. "So what's next?" Elena asked, a hint of excitement in her voice. I smiled, feeling a surge of determination. "We prepare, we learn, we grow stronger, and when the time comes, we reach out to the stars, not in fear, but in hope. We've faced the apocalypse, and emerged stronger. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together, as guardians of Earth and ambassadors to the cosmos. As the sun set on our reborn world, I felt a sense of limitless possibility. We had weathered the storm of the outbreak, faced down an alien threat, and forged a new relationship with our living planet. Now a new adventure awaited us, one that would take us beyond the boundaries of our world and into the vast unknown of the universe. The journey that had begun with a strange weather pattern and a zombie outbreak had led us here, to the threshold of a cosmic destiny, and whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew that we would face them with courage, unity, and an unbreakable bond with the Earth that had given us life. The future was uncertain, filled with both promise and peril, but we were ready. Earth and humanity, once at odds, now moved forward. As one, our story wasn't ending. In many ways, it was just beginning. In the months following our victory over the interdimensional threat, Earth underwent a transformation unlike anything we could have imagined. The planetary shield we had activated didn't just protect us from external dangers, it accelerated the healing of our world at an unprecedented rate. Forests regrew, oceans cleared, and the air became purer than it had been in centuries. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in humanity itself. Our connection to the Earth, once limited to those of us who worked directly with the nexus points, had spread to every living person. We could feel the planet's rhythms, its needs, its very heartbeat. It was as if we had all become empaths, not just with each other, but with the world itself. This new awareness brought challenges as well as benefits. Many struggled to adapt to the constant influx of sensations and emotions, not just from other humans, but from animals, plants, and the Earth itself. We had to develop new techniques for mental shielding, for processing this vast network of consciousness we were now part of. As a leader in this new world, I found myself busier than ever. There were still those who resisted the changes, who feared our new connection with the Earth and each other. We worked tirelessly to help them understand, to show them the beauty and potential of our new existence. But even as we celebrated our progress and marveled at our new capabilities, a sense of unease began to grow. It started as a whisper, a faint disturbance in the back of our collective consciousness. At first, we dismissed it as an echo of our recent battle, a residual fear that would fade with time. But it didn't fade. It grew stronger, more insistent. Through our connection with the Earth, we began to sense something stirring deep beneath the surface, something ancient, something that had been dormant for eons. Elena was the first to put it into words during one of our council meetings. "I think," she said, her voice hushed with a mix of awe and fear, "we might have awakened something when we activated the planetary shield, something the Earth itself had forgotten about." Her words sent a chill through the room. We had all felt it, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way we couldn't ignore. We immediately set to work, using our enhanced connection with the planet to probe deeper, to understand what this new threat might be. What we discovered shook us to our core, buried deep within the Earth's crust, in caverns that had never seen the light of day. We found evidence of an ancient civilization, not human, not even of this world. They had come to Earth millions of years ago, when our planet was young, and life was just beginning to emerge from the primordial oceans. These beings, which we came to call the progenitors, had seen the potential in our world. They had seeded it with the building blocks of life, guiding its evolution, but they had also left safeguards, fail-safes, to ensure that if their experiment went wrong, it could be contained or even erased. The planetary shield we had activated was one such safeguard, but in doing so, we had triggered a countdown. The progenitors' systems, dormant for millions of years, were coming back online, and they were assessing whether Earth's current life forms, humanity included, were worthy of continuing, or if a reset was in order. We were being judged, and we didn't even know the criteria. The realization galvanized us into action. We needed to find a way to communicate with these ancient systems, to prove our worth, to show that we were more than just an experiment to be discarded. But how do you argue for your species' right to exist with a machine intelligence older than life itself? We threw ourselves into the problem, our greatest minds working around the clock. We delved deeper into the Earth's memories, trying to understand the progenitors' motivations, their values. We sent expeditions to the deepest parts of the oceans, to the most remote corners of the world, searching for more clues, more pieces of the puzzle. As we worked, we could feel the clock ticking. The Earth itself seemed to tremble with anticipation or fear. The connection that had been our strength now filled us with a constant sense of impending doom. Every human on the planet could feel it, even if they didn't understand its source. Panic began to spread. Despite our best efforts to keep the situation contained, rumors leaked out. Conspiracy theories ran wild. Some claimed we were facing divine judgment. Others insisted it was all a hoax, a ploy for control by the world's governments. We needed a breakthrough. Kids I had saved during the initial outbreak, now a brilliant young scientist, came to me with an idea so audacious it bordered on insanity. "What if," he said, his eyes shining with that mix of fear and excitement that I had come to associate with our greatest leaps forward. "We don't just try to communicate with with the progenitor systems? What if we try to become them? The room fell silent as we all tried to process what he was suggesting. Alex continued, his words tumbling out in a rush of inspiration. We have the planetary shield. We have our connection to the Earth. What if we could use that to interface directly with the progenitor's technology? Not just to talk to it, but to merge with it, to understand it from the inside? It was dangerous, insane even. But as I looked around at my team, I saw the same realization dawning on all their faces. It might be our only chance. We set to work immediately, repurposing our Nexus chambers for this new task. Elena led a team to modify our bioengineered plants, creating new strains that could interface with both our human biology and the alien technology we had discovered. I worked on enhancing our mental connection, pushing the limits of our newfound abilities. As we prepared, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought us here. From a simple weather scientist to a survivor of the zombie apocalypse to humanity's representative in a cosmic judgment. If someone had told me this would be my path when I first noticed those strange weather patterns so long ago, I would have thought they were mad. The day of the attempt arrived all too soon. As I stood in the modified Nexus chamber, surrounded by softly glowing plants and humming machinery, I felt a moment of doubt. Were we ready for this? Were we meddling with forces beyond our comprehension? But then I felt it, a pulse of reassurance through my connection with the Earth. Our planet, our partner in all of this, was with us. Whatever happened, we would face it together. I took a deep breath and gave the signal to begin. The chamber filled with a soft light as the plants around me began to pulse with energy. I felt my consciousness expanding, not just to the Earth, this time, but beyond, into realms of data and thought I had never imagined. The experience was overwhelming. I saw the history of our planet flash before my eyes, from its fiery birth to the first stirrings of life, to the rise and fall of countless species. I saw the progenitors, beings of light and energy, seeding worlds across the galaxy with the potential for life. And then I saw their failsafe, the cold, impartial logic that would judge whether a world's life had developed as intended or needed to be wiped clean and started anew. I felt the weight of that judgment turning towards Earth, towards humanity. With every ounce of will I possessed, I reached out to that ancient intelligence. I showed it our struggles, our triumphs, our capacity for both great good and terrible evil. I showed it how we had faced the zombie outbreak, how we had united with the Earth to face cosmic threats. I laid bare the whole of human history, the beauty and the ugliness, the kindness and the cruelty. For a moment that felt like eternity, there was no response. I floated in that vast sea of data and memory, a tiny mote of human consciousness against the backdrop of cosmic scales. Had we failed? Was this the end? Then, slowly, I felt a shift. The ancient systems were reacting, processing what I had shown them. I felt confusion, then curiosity, then something that, if I had to put a name to it, I would call respect. The judgment turned. Earth, humanity, all the life on our planet, we had been weighed and measured, and we had been found, if not perfect, then at least worthy of continuing our journey. As the realization washed over me, I felt a surge of joy and relief so profound it threatened to overwhelm me. We had done it. We had faced judgment on a cosmic scale and emerged victorious. The return to normal consciousness was jarring. I found myself back in the Nexus chamber, surrounded by my team, all of them looking at me with a mix of concern and hope. Elena was the first to speak, her voice trembling slightly. Did it work? Is Earth safe? I nodded, too overwhelmed for words at first. When I finally found my voice, it came out as little more than a whisper. We did it. We passed the test. The progenitor systems have accepted us as worthy inheritors of Earth. The room erupted in cheers and tears of joy. We had faced what might have been the end of everything and come out the other side. But even as we celebrated, I felt a new weight settling on my shoulders. We had been judged worthy, yes, but that was just the beginning. In interfacing with the progenitor's systems, we had gained access to knowledge and technology beyond our wildest dreams. We now had the potential to truly become cosmic progenitors had done. But with that potential came great responsibility. We would have to be careful to use this new power wisely. We had seen firsthand the dangers of meddling with forces we didn't fully understand. As the celebration continued around me, I found myself looking out the window at the world we had saved. The Earth, our partner, our home, seemed to glow with new vitality. We had come so far from the days of the outbreak, had grown and changed in ways I never could have imagined. But I knew this wasn't the end of our journey. In many ways, it was just the beginning. We had weathered the storm of the zombie apocalypse, faced down cosmic threats, and now stood on the threshold of a new era for humanity and Earth. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever wonders or terrors the cosmos held in store for us, I knew we would face them as we had faced everything else together, humanity and Earth, partners in a grand cosmic adventure. As I turned back to my celebrating team, I couldn't help but smile. We had survived the apocalypse, and in doing so, we had found our true purpose. The future was uncertain, but it was bright with possibility, and we were ready for whatever came next.